Stendahl. I'm a graphic designer, illustrator, and book artist. I like to make my own journals for visual journaling, and I also like to make books that I can use as one-of-a-kind artist books or limited edition books. And I'm really excited to share with you how to make a book that I call sewn on the spine. It means that all of the signatures are sewn onto the spine of the hard case. So this is the case, the outer part of the book. And as you can see from all of the sewing on the books in front of me, they're all sewn to that spine. And this is an old structure, and it was often made with soft leather covers, and it is something that you can make easily. In fact, there's so many good things about this book, I actually made a list so I wouldn't forget any of them. So one of the great things about this book is that because the signatures are sewn on the spine, there's more space between the signatures when you open up a book. Let's take this one out, for instance. So there's a little bit of space between them. And this means that when the book is first made, it's very short or shallow at the foredge of the book, and at the spine it's higher. And the wonderful thing about that is that as you add collage, or if you add 3D mixed media techniques, the book will gradually yawn open, but it doesn't hurt the spine. It puts absolutely no stress on the spine. So it's all going to hold together for you. The other thing that's great about this is that you can use multiple types of papers, because the different thicknesses of the paper and the tension that you're sewing is more controllable than when you're sewing things together in a text block. So this is an example of a book that's full of all sorts of different kinds of papers. This is a journal that I've actually filled, and we'll look at a couple stills of this, but this also has lots of different types of papers. You can see little bits of paper. All of this stuff is possible with this kind of structure without putting any kind of stress on the spine. So it's really fantastic for scrapbooks. It's really fantastic if you like to do albums, maybe a wedding album, or it's great if you want to have a guest book at a party. It's great for doing beaded decoration. Now some of these over here have beads on them, and I'm not going to talk about beading because that's a whole involved thing on its own, but I just wanted to show you the possibilities of this. I used to do a lot of beading, and I like to do structural things, and so it made sense to me one day, since I like to make books and I like to bead, why don't I combine them? And this is the perfect structure to do that and to make it decorative. I showed you fold outs. I talked about different papers. You don't have to cut pages out to make room for your collage, because as I already talked to you about it, this is just going to naturally grow as you add more collage in there. That space is going to increase. So it's kind of like a self-regulating book. You can set it, leave it alone, and it's going to be just fine, which I think is a really wonderful attribute. Another really great attribute of this book is that sometimes you want to use art papers that are rather soft on the surface. And so if you do a traditional case-bound book which has a text block, all the signatures are sewn together as one block, and then you case that text block in. You're relying on the ability of the paper to take a glue joint between each of the signatures. There's going to be a little space between them, and they've got to stick together, or there's going to be some structural issues with the book. Now, some art papers are too soft to hold that glue joint. And so, but you still might want to work on those papers. And in fact, I really love working on one of those papers, which is Magnani Pescia, and it comes in a light robin's egg blue, and it's a beautiful paper for working in collage or working with gouache. It's a lovely paper to sketch on with colored pencils, but if you do it in a traditional case-bound book, when you get to those places where the two signatures are together, that is going to tear apart and you're going to see through to the back of the spine. But if you do that type of paper and fold it into signatures and put it in this type of book, you aren't going to have that problem. Now, you will have more space across that spread, and so that's one of the disadvantages, which I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but that's one of the disadvantages of this type of book, is that if you want to work across the gutter when the signatures change, there will be always a little bit of space there. But I think that given all of the benefits of the book, that's a really small price to pay for only a couple moments in each span of the book. Another great thing about this book is that it is easy for people who have dexterity limitations. So for people who have arthritis, for people who have limited mobility of their hands for other reasons, this is a book that is much more simple to put together than a case-bound book. There's still a need for really taking care and stretching fabric over boards and all of those types of things. And then the sewing takes a little bit of effort. But overall, this book is something that a first-time bookbinder can make very, very quickly and very easily. And then get a result that looks polished and be very, very satisfied with that. The book also requires very few tools to make. This is something that the home bookbinder who doesn't have a dedicated bindery studio type situation can make. And I'm going to talk about that in supplies to show you what types of supplies you need and how you can make these at home. So that's another advantage of this book. I know for a lot of people who take my bookbinding classes, one of the things they look for is a book that will lie flat on a scanner. Now, I think that my flat back book and my rounded back spine book will lay a little bit flatter than this one, but I routinely journal in these because of all the wonderful things I've already told you about. And it will, depending on how tightly you put the signatures together, it will lay relatively flat, flatter than most commercially bound sketchbooks of a conventional type, the case-bound type. So you might have a little bit of extra issue if you have maybe 8 signatures or something, the wider the book, and the spine doesn't move at all. And so in a wider book, opening it flat as you get to the other ends of something, and sometimes also in the center, you might have a little bit of difficulty, but nothing that again makes it something that isn't suitable for people who like things to be relatively flat on the scanner. The other disadvantage to this book, and I don't really see it as a disadvantage, but some students seem kind of shocked, you can have, oh, you can't see the things here, you can have all this variety of stitching on the outside. That's something that you can just go wild and crazy about. But what will happen, and you can have nice different selection of colors. This is sort of tone on tone. Other places you see that I've used something that's more contrasting for thread. But what happens is in the middle of the signature, I'm trying to find one here, the stitch is going to show. And so you will have color thread down the middle of your stitch. And that bothers some people. It doesn't bother me because you can collage over it. This book is perfect for that. You can paint around it. I frequently paint with acrylic markers, and the acrylic markers will actually adhere to the wax thread and cover that up. But in some of the signatures, and I'm not going to be able to find it, but you'll see that as we move through the making of the book, there'll actually be a knot from the beginning and a knot at the end. And so those will show. And so some people look for ways to hide those. And again, if you're a collage artist or you don't mind painting over things, you can do that. Often, I don't even do anything with them, I just leave them. But that's something I have to, in full disclosure, I have to tell you that that is something that some people think is a disadvantage to this type of book. But the types of color and decoration that using the colored thread allows you on the spine, I think way overcompensates for any minor disgruntlement that you can find with just color down some of your sigs. Okay? And one of the greatest advantages of this book is that if you take this book, for example, and this is made with sheets of 22 by 30 inch Strathmore 500 series mixed media paper, which is one of my favorite papers. Now, once I've made this book, and I know that I've got it the way I like it, I know that I've got the spaces between the signatures the way I want them, and so on, I know what all of these measurements are, and the book process of binding this type of book is not so finicky that the individual book artist is going to interject a lot of play in any of this. And so it's not suddenly going to be, if I make a book and you make a book, they're going to be very, very similar. So how tightly we sew or how loose we sew, all of those types of things, which matter a great deal, how we round the spine when we're rounding the spine, all of those things matter in other structures, but they don't matter in this book. So because they don't, one of the great things is that once you get a book the way you like it, and you keep records on how you cut your boards and your fabric and all of that, you can essentially decide, okay, I really liked this book. I need 5 journals, lickety-split fast. You get out your information sheet, and I'll talk about that in a moment, and you look at how many sheets you need to make this book, and you go and get that paper. You tear the paper down just as you did for this time, because you have your little tear diagram. And then you can also, maybe you're waiting for the paper to come to you via the mail. While you're waiting for the paper, you can go ahead and start cutting your boards, cutting your internal end sheets, cutting your spine, everything that you need, so that when your decorative paper, your fabric, so that when the paper comes and you tear it down, you're all set to go and start binding. You don't have to wait and cut the cover after you have the guts of the book done. And that's a real advantage. It's one of the reasons why I enjoy teaching this so much. I can have everything ready to go. I can train my students on how they cut things, but I already have all the materials cut, and I know that regardless of their skill level, each one of them is going to put together a stunning book. And we don't have to, even when you teach in a bindery where there might be some equipment, there's never going to be a big board shears, for instance, for every single student to use at the same time. You have to share. Well, this is a great time savings. So I just can't be too excited about this book. I just want to show you too. This was a 22 by 30 inch size sheet of paper that we started with for this book. And in order to get to this size, as you'll learn as we go along in class, there was a little bit of waste, that I'm doing bunny ears around there, a little bit of waste that had to be cut off the sheet before we did all the folding and tearing. Well, with this type of book, you can save that. It doesn't have to be waste at all. You can actually insert that into your signatures. And that's what I've done throughout this book. Of course, I won't find the other ones, but there are other ones in here. And so again, I just can't say enough fun things about this book. It's relatively quick and to do, and you can give it as gifts to people. You can expand the kinds of paper that you want. This paper also is one that it's an old printing paper and it's not made anymore, but it was one that also didn't glue well between the signatures, and so again, it's perfect for a structure like this. Oh, the other thing that you can do is you can really change up how you work with these books relatively easily, because this whole cover is going to be created flat without any of this paper. That is not going to be there. You're going to make glue and then wait and put weight on top of it and let it dry, regardless of all of this stuff. And so you can do nifty things to the cover much more easily than you can with other structures. You can take, and this one is, a window is cut here, and we can talk about that in class, and then 2 pieces of bookboard that are the same thickness as this back one were used, so that the piece could actually be sandwiched in there. And normally I would use a piece of acetate or laminate on top of this, but when I created this book I didn't have any on hand. But that's something else you can do. So again, a lot of ways to change these books. I teach a class with this kind of structure called Shabby Chic, and I do a variety of different things on the covers that makes them interesting for book artists to continue to explore visually inside the book as well. And I teach another class about covering your books and decorating the covers with paints and other medium. And that also lends hundreds and hundreds of different kinds of possibilities. So once you learn how to make these books, you can do all of those kinds of alterations yourself. You can experiment and explore. So I'm really excited that you're taking this class. We're going to look at supplies next, and then we'll get right into tearing paper and doing the books when the class opens. So thanks for joining me.